Do you notice that if you were a businessman, do you notice that businessmen are more likely to, let's say, invest in long-term projects like building a new plant or sectors of the economy like mining that take a long time before they produce a product? They're going to engage in expansion, new investment, when interest rates are low. We do not need a diagram drawn to understand this. If interest rates are low, then borrowing is cheap. If it's going to take you 10 years to finish your project, you're going to want interest rates to be low. So when interest rates go lower, you say, all right, maybe now I'll borrow. Now I'll borrow for that project. So as interest rates come down, they get lower and lower, investors are more likely to engage in longer-term things, because the more long-term it is, the more interest rate sensitive it is. Like a 30-year mortgage is more interest rate sensitive than a 2-day mortgage. Okay? All right, that's great. It's great that businesses are engaging in long-term production when interest rates are low. And this is why. And this, again, shows how elegantly and beautifully the free market coordinates production. How do the interest rates get low? They get low because we in this room save more. And the banks have more to lend. So in effect, the price of borrowing comes down. They have an abundance of stuff to lend you. So we make interest rates lower. And when we save and make interest rates lower, what are we saying when we save? When I say I'm not going to go out and blow every penny of my paycheck, I'm going to save some of it, what I'm saying is I'm not going to consume everything now. I'm going to consume some stuff in the distant future. I'm going to save some now, consume in the future. Well, that's good. That's the very time that businesses are going to want to produce for the future. Long-term projects for the future. So we coordinate production. But secondly, notice what happens. Let's say you and I start saving more of our paychecks, and we're not buying as many consumer goods. We're not buying as many hats or toothbrushes or comic books. What happens to the hat, toothbrush, and comic book industries? They start to shrink, relatively speaking. We don't buy their stuff. We're saving instead. Well, we don't need as many comic books anymore. So the comic book industry doesn't need as many trucks to ship the comic books. They don't need as much ink. They don't need the steel for their production process. They don't need as many workers to ship the comic books. So these industries are going to start to shrink. These consumer goods industries are going to start to shrink. And when they shrink, what do? They release trucking resources and lumber and workers that they don't need anymore. And where are those resources going to go? To all the long-term projects that businesses are engaged in. So when interest rates become low, this reflects more saving, less consumption. So the consumption goods industries are releasing resources to use those resources. So again, there's a coordination that goes on. There's an expansion here, and there's a contraction here. It works out. But now here's where the question gets answered. Why do we have a business cycle? Why do we suddenly see businessmen all making mistakes at the same time? When they're supposed to be good at this, why do they suddenly stink? Here's the answer. Let's imagine a second scenario in which this time interest rates go lower, but not because the public has saved more, but because some sinister institution has artificially pushed them lower. Now, I won't give away the identity of this institution. I suspect you know what it is. But let's just say there's some institution that can just push interest rates down low. Well, now in this case, once again, businesses will say, hey, look, low interest rates, let's start borrowing like crazy for our long-term projects. But notice what the difference is. In this case, the low interest rates do not result from our additional saving. So you and I are spending as much as ever. We're continuing to buy hats and toothbrushes and comic books. And yet, meanwhile, businesses are engaged in long-term product development of new products. And meanwhile, we're buying a lot more of existing products right now. So we've got a time mismatch. But secondly, if we're still buying as many or more comic books and hats and toothbrushes as before, then those industries are not shrinking. They're not releasing trucks and laborers and raw materials for use by sectors. So where are these businesses going to get the resources to finish all the projects they've started? Where are they going to get them? From Mars? Where are they going to come from? If nothing is shrinking in the economy, how can this expand? Where are the resources going to come from? And so ultimately, the economy is trying to do too much. Under the influence of false interest rates, which have misled businessmen, the economy has gotten more ambitious than it should have been. It's trying to do things it can't do. It doesn't have the physical stuff to finish all the things it's doing. People are trying to consume more, and they're trying to invest more at the same time. Can't be done. you wind up with a tug of war over resources. Instead of resources smoothly transitioning from one sector to another, the resources are instead being fought over by the various sectors. And you wind up with bankruptcies. Costs get too high. These resources get bid up in price. Now, if this is all too technical, Mises tells it as a story. He's got a beautiful allegory. He says, if you don't like any of this economic stuff, I'll make it simple. He says, imagine an economy that consists of like one guy. An economy with one guy building one house. I can explain the whole business cycle theory with just that. Let's suppose we have a master. He's got a blueprint. Unfortunately, the house on that blueprint requires 20% more bricks than he has. He doesn't know this. This is the economy on one of these unsustainable, artificially low interest rate booms. It's physically new. So this master builder just goes about his business, whistling away, building the house. But he can never finish this house, right? The whole economy, there are no other bricks, and there are no Martians with bricks coming. So is it better for him to discover this error right away or 3 years from now? Well, obviously, the sooner he finds out, the sooner he can correct his course. If he finds out after laying 2 rows of bricks, well, too bad, but he's only wasted 2 rows. But what if he finds out as he's laying the last brick, and he turns around and says, oh man, there are no bricks here. Well, this is bad. He's wasted all these bricks. He's wasted all his time. He can never get that back. That is entirely a waste. He's going to have to either destroy the house or destroy a part of it, go back to his blueprint and reconfigure the whole thing. That's, in effect, what's going on in the economy. In fact, the recession in an economy is really like the moment when this builder in our allegory realizes, wait a minute, I'm doing the wrong thing. I can't finish this particular house. I've been misled into doing the wrong thing. I've got to retool. That's what the economy is doing. It's saying, whoa, wait a minute. We've way overexpanded these higher order stages of production. We don't have the resources to continue this. This has to be shut down and stopped. And we've got to get these resources and shuffle them back where they belong. That's what's going on in the recession. So in fact, the bad thing, strictly speaking, is the boom period when the master builder is busily building his house. And a lot of people are inclined to say, this is great, look, he's working. Isn't that great? He's working. Yeah, he's working on an unfinishable house. How is that good? No, the good thing is when he realizes he shouldn't have been doing that. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you my contribution to Austrian business cycle theory. And it goes like this. Let's suppose we felt sorry for the master builder. We know he's building an unbuildable house, but we just don't have the heart to tell him. So we think, well, gee, how can we hold off the moment? I mean, let's let him be as happy as he can for as long as possible. So let's just get him drunk. So he's just building the house, and he doesn't even think to turn and look at the brick supply. Well, have we helped the guy? I mean, is the house now buildable? Well, no. Of course, it's even worse now, because now he'll keep on building something he shouldn't even be doing, and then at the end, he will have wasted all the more resources. That's exactly what we've just lived through. And that's exactly what happens when we hear people today say, well, let's see, to an unsustainable production boom. Well, let's solve that by lower interest rates. Well, that's basically saying, let's get the master builder drunk. And in fact, and now I'll tell you, the institution that does this, that sends false signals to investors. Yes, I'm sorry, I know, we all love the Federal Reserve System. Well, no, not me, maybe some people do, but the Federal Reserve System in 2001 was headed by a guy named, I guess we all know, Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan did the equivalent of getting the master builder in our allegory drunk. Because in 2001, what was going on? We were just at the tail end of the dot-com boom, where everybody had been investing in these internet companies. I mean, internet companies like Pets.com. Like, yeah, I think I want to buy a rabbit on the internet. And this seems sensible to people. Yeah, that seems like something people might want to do. Well, it turns out they didn't actually want to do that. But everybody was going crazy with these internet companies. And then that crashed. In 2001, Greenspan said, well, look, I'm sick of the economy being in the doldrums. What else? Let's lower interest rates. That'll spur investment, and that'll get everybody going. Okay, well, that's true. We had a very mild recession in 2001. But notice what happened in 2001. That was the only recession ever on record in which housing starts went up. People drew the conclusion, as a result of this, in fact, housing prices went up too. People thought, well, I guess housing is the best investment you can make. House prices never go down. They don't even go down in this recession. Wonderful. We should all get into housing. In fact, the more houses you own, the better. And if you don't have a job, better still. This takes off because all the experts are saying, no, this housing boom is perfectly solid. It's not a bubble. Don't worry about it. It's because Greenspan refuses to let the economy sort itself out. Figure out what needs to go where, sort itself out after the dot-com boom. No, instead, he gins it up. He gets it going further. So people continue along an unsustainable production structure, so that now when this bust comes, it's much worse because all these intervening years we've been misled into doing the wrong thing. And yet we have experts, I won't mention any names, but there's a certain Nobel Prize winner who writes for the New York Times. As a few of you know, I feel almost guilty mentioning the name Paul Krugman, because now the rest of you will not be able to enjoy the tranquil lives you once did, because now you'll be tortured by this guy forever. But in 2001, Paul Krugman said, you know what the economy needs now? Lower interest rates to spur housing. Well, we got that. That worked. But I think we spurred it a little bit too much. And then later, Krugman said, I predicted there'd be a housing bubble. Oh, gee, no kidding. You advocated the very thing that brought about the housing bubble. Because let's suppose we didn't have a Federal Reserve System, we didn't have a Soviet Communist. Let's suppose we had a free market. What would have happened if people had just started buying a lot of houses? And I'll wrap up in a couple minutes, but let's suppose people just started buying houses. What would have happened in a free market? Well, just like in the housing boom we experienced, house prices would have gone up to reflect all the increased demand. But what else would have gone up is interest rates. The banks would have started to run out of money to lend, and the interest rate would have started to go up. And the interest rate, as Hayek said, serves as a brake on the economy. It's the economy's way of saying, stop it, you're doing too much. Stop doing what you're doing, all you speculators. Go do something else. So the economy would have been sending a red light. But when you're Alan Greenspan, and you can artificially push those interest rates back down, instead the lights are all green. Just proceed as before. And so people continue. So it's the funding provided by just creating credit out of thin air that makes it possible for people to keep buying houses that keep rising in price. Where would that have come from? Where would the money to keep buying things that keep rising in price have come from if it hadn't been created by, in this case, the Federal Reserve System? And so it is the Fed that feeds into this. And so we could talk all day long about deregulation and this or that. If the system itself encourages the creation of asset bubbles and encourages taking risks, you can regulate all you want. If the system is still screwed up, it's like trying to build a dam made out of paper mache. If the structure of the system encourages this behavior, it's not going to do you any good. And what's more, what the Fed also does is that because the Fed can create money out of thin air in any quantity, so there is no physical constraint on how much it can create, every market actor knows that the only thing standing between himself and a bailout from the Fed is sufficient political will. The Fed doesn't have to go mine gold, which would take 7 years. They can just print up the money or put it into a computer screen. And so therefore people act more recklessly because they know that the big bailout machine stands ready to bail them out. Even the IMF admitted this a couple of years ago. They said, gee, the major financial firms around the world are taking on huge leveraging risks because they expect a bailout from their central banks. Well, isn't that interesting? Even the IMF admits this.